actually have to sneak out of here. That's what I'm saying. I'm going to go here. Oh.
You want to sit here? I'll sit here.
Facebook, so that way I can see. You're not on it. Okay.
I have a love page.
Yeah, yeah.
Hello, my name is Carlow University, and my husband was a Naomi Shihab. We bought the Grolier 15 years ago and loved it so much. He was actually a philosophy professor, and poetry was his next best thing, you know. So we're so happy to have this reading tonight and welcome these wonderful poets. And there's also quite a group on Zoom too. So, and I just want to say that we look at this place as a sacred place. And we're happy to have
Good evening. I'm Gill. I'm doing the introductions tonight, and I am so thrilled to be here to introduce three wonderful writers. And as I found out, it's their first time reading here, so let's go give them more welcomes than they each one. So we have Narciso Torres, Beatty, and Lesley. And so I'll introduce you each time. So it's a pleasure to introduce Angela tonight. I got to meet Angela a few years ago with Jennifer John at Bread Loaf. We were talking about this at, a few minutes ago about how they were dancing with the students. We were teaching the students at Bread Loaf, and they had a wonderful night, and I was just there watching. But Angela's just full of life and an amazing writer, so I'm so happy that she's joining us tonight. Narciso Torres is the author of 3 poetry collections. What Happens is Neither, Blood Orange, which is terrific, and To the Bone. Recent work appears or is forthcoming in Poetry, Prairie Schooner, and Poetry Northwest. Graduate of Warren Wilson MFA Program for Writers and Harvard Graduate School of Education. Angela has received fellowships from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Illinois Arts Council, and Ragdale Foundation. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Manila, she now lives in San Diego and serves as the reviews editor for RHINO Poetry. Please welcome Angela.
Thank you so much, January. It's so good to see you. Hi, Ian. Thanks for for being here. I'm really so happy and so honored to be a featured reader here tonight. Before I start, I'd like to give a shout out to the Grolier, to James, Carol, Mateo, the intern, and everyone who helped to make this event possible and to make all of this possible. And I really mean all of this. This is a labor of love. I guess I'll start by saying I cannot tell you how honored and how grateful I feel to be reading at the Grolier. I was a grad student here back in the day, another lifetime ago, and I walked down the street to my dorm, and I would look into the window and I'd tell myself I didn't feel worthy to walk in. It felt like a portal to some holy. And Carol is right, it is a sacred place. And only later would I realize that poetry is that portal, and this is a portal that keeps that alive for so many, has opened doors for so many, and I'm just so grateful that we're still here.
I also want to thank everyone that's come from far and near and people who tuned in online. I know there's family and friends out there, old friends, new friends, and soon to be friends, and hopefully people who will still be my friends after I read it. I'll read a couple of poems from Blood Orange, my first book, and then 3 from my latest book, and then I'll end with some new book. And as my poetry teacher said, always put on your power gear and my reading glasses. And start with Blood Orange. Blood Orange is a book I wrote as a poetic memoir of sorts of my growing up years in the Philippines and my eventual move to the United States as an adult. So it's partly about my childhood there and then my early life here. And part of my early life here, as I mentioned, was living here in Cambridge as a student. And my first job after grad school was working at a bookstore, books, which is not around anymore, like so many of the independent bookstores in the square. But back then, it was like a heaven to me. It's a lost heaven until now for me. The doors closed after the owner died, Mr. Rosen, and he became my dear friend. I walked in literally after the last day of school, and I'm like, can I work here? And he looked at me and he said, take off your coat and start today. And I did. So this is for Mr. Rosen. I have to mention that the word books in print appears here, and books in print is the database that they had before computers. So there's 3-volume hardbound, super heavy, you don't want to drop them on your foot. They're as heavy as the King James Bible, and that's what we used at the store because it was rather old school. We had no credit cards, we had nothing. We had a little card system where he wrote people who owed the store money. That's how he kept track of credit. It's really old school, and I'm proving how ancient I am, so yeah, no shame there. So I'll start with a poem called Lost Objects. My mother of pearl pendant, half a teardrop slung on a leather cord, bought from a hawker of veils in batik. A brown book of poems, signed by the Indonesian poet who sat next to me at dinner. 4 words remain in memory: to love, to wander. I'm missing a watercolor of vegetable vendors, given by my mother on the occasion of my first apartment. The stillness of those nights, the last box empty, searching the white ceiling, imagining the shades of green, the shapes of the women, squatting, stooped, large with child, bent over baskets piled with the season's bounty. I'd give anything to find my tape of Glenn Gould playing Bach's Goldberg variations. The one my father copied for me on a gray cassette before the age of CDs. Hearing the first strains at Mandrake Books on Story Street, Mr. Rosen, my boss, paused at the window, lost in shining sound. Smooth as water over stones. Idly he smiled, arthritic knuckles tapping time on a dog-eared book's print, eyes fixed on some lost heaven. Okay. So Harvard Square has changed so much since I lived here. There are a lot more ice cream places for sure, and bookstores. Bookstores too. Both are important, both are really essential to the lives of students here, I know. But one thing that hasn't changed is the energy. I feel like, especially around this time of year when students are moving into their dorms and parents are dropping kids off, there's excitement in the air. It's almost palpable. And I felt that just walking through here, walking here yesterday evening. And I thought about my own son who moved to college a few years ago, and how that felt. It all came back to me. So I thought I'd read this poem, and it's called For a Son Turning 60. By the time the black blade clears my windshield, its shush thump, the sound of blood amplified by octave scope. The roadside aspen, its windswept leaves spent like so many coins, is gone. Before I can say the last syllable of your name, you've bolted through the back door. wheels crunching gravel like small bones. And years ahead, when I'd emptied your drawer of photographs, plastered the last on your cellophane, your room will be light and dust. Books, meat, shelves staggered by their heft. Whatever bindings you left unbroken will stay unbroken. What pages unturned remain unturned. Dagger-edged, clean. So I'd like to turn now to my latest book, What Happens Later. And this book is an homage and an elegy to my parents, both of whom passed in 2019. My mother to Alzheimer's and my father to cancer and broken heart. I'm gonna take some good water. More good advice from Ellen Bright Boyd. Always drink water. So many of these poems are an attempt to preserve what I could of my mother's memories, especially as her memory began to fail. Her stories, her recipes, the songs she played the piano. And this next poem is actually a collection of her superstitions, her sayings, if you will, that she picked up from her ancestors and passed on to her generation. Some of them are quite terrifying, but it's always a comfort for me to go back to these and recite them, kind of like a spell or something that points to another world that follows a different set of laws. If you go to bed hungry. If you go to bed hungry, your soul will get up and steal cold rice from the pot. Stop playing with fire before the moon rises, or you'll pee in your sleep. Sweeping the floor after dark sweeps wealth and good fortune out the door. Fork dropped, a gentleman present. Spoon, a bachelor. Bathing after you've cooked over a hot stove makes the veins swell. For safe passage to the guest who leaves mid-meal, turn your plate. The adage goes, coffee stunts growth. 12 grapes on New Year's, the opposite. Advice from the learned. Book under your pillow. Never step on. Never drop. Every rice grain that remains on your plate, you'll meet again on the footpath to heaven. You'll have to stop to pick up each one. Okay. There are a number of self-portraits in this book because aside from being a book of mourning, of grieving, it's also a book about reconstructing the self after grief. I mean, how do you reconstruct a life, a sense of identity after you lose the two people who are solely responsible, or mostly responsible for who you are? So this one is self-portrait, that's rosary beads. And it's also an ode to the fact that my parents would pray the rosary every night as a ritual from as far back as I remember until their last few days. So, to me, I kept my dad's rosary because for me it's a talisman for just that idea that there's something that you can grasp at, a kind of solace when you need it, something tangible. And then my poems are that for me too. Self-portrait as rosary beads. Curled amid lint and loose change, tucked in a jacket's satin lining, or crushed with used gum in seams of denim. I've known pain clinics in airports, taxi cabs, and stale schoolrooms where time is a honeycomb in winter. I'm olive wood, carnelian, plastic, black onyx. I'm rosebuds pressed into fragrance fevers. Your heat is my musk, your worry my fire. Pick your mystery. If Tuesday, sorrowful. If Saturday, glorious. I've held you in grocery lines, big lines, the hours between sleepless and woken. Hold me. I'm glass, shattered, smoothed by my mother's nerves, pillowed beneath her cheek. Counted, accountable, counting, counted on. Crystallized, dangled on a string, or hung from a mirror in a river of traffic. Praying for green, for an end, for mutiny of rain. Litany of sorrows of praise, I'm a crown of rivers, a crown of roses, a crown of purple thorns. I'm faithful as breadcrumbs on barbed wire. Lose me to birds or to night's dark thicket. Touch and be splintered, sundered, soothed, surrendered. I scent on your fingertips. I think just one more from this book. So this is the title poem. It's What Happens Is Neither, and I should mention that this is only my second time to read in person from this new book. Well, it's not that new anymore, it's about a year old now, but after countless Zoom readings, what I realized was that the poem was not just about grieving some devastating losses that I had suffered, but also a way to prepare me for what was to come in the 2 years of the pandemic, which I didn't foresee, of course, when I was writing this. And so this book is, this poem is about the circularity of grief and how we, there really is no end or beginning. It's just life. I should mention too that the title leads into the poem, so I'll just read it through. What happens is neither the end nor the beginning, yet we're wired to look for signs. Consider the peonies. One makes a perfect bud after months of nothing. Another's leaves are ringed with black rot. How can I not think end? How can I not say beginning? Leaves fall when days shorten because the tree must reduce to its tough parts. Twig, branch, bark. My mother sleeps away the daylight. She nods off while chewing a spoonful of fish and rice, her head a peony gone to seed. Father calls to say she doesn't recognize him. Turning to him, she cried out, certain a stranger was in her bed. He played his violin till she slept, a leaf in late fall curling into itself. In autumn, chlorophyll disappears, canceling green from leaves, so yellow and magenta can blaze. In my mirror, I see her, the smile that favors a cheek, eyes slanting, in the shape of small fish we eat for breakfast. Trees know best the now of things. What goes on has been going on for centuries. Washing dishes, I rest a foot on my standing leg. A fork clangs on the tile. I rinse a cracked cup and try not to think of endings. And I'll end with a newish poem. I wrote this during the pandemic when it was really quite difficult for me to keep a practice of writing because there's just too much going on. The only thing I'd like to mention is that this poem is actually a cento, which is an Italian form that borrows from other poets, other fully formed poems. And the poets I borrowed from here are 3 of my pressmates from 4-Way Books, John Murillo, Yona Harvey, and Julia Wes. All fine poets, you should check out their books. It's also written in the pantun form, and pantun is a Malaysian form that braids together lines in the poem, and it's in a very specific repeated pattern. So each line in this poem you will hear twice. The loss variations. Start with loss, lose everything, then lose it all again. Dust, algebra, fun. Like a high yellow sadness, this will be one weaning after another. Dust, algebra, fire. The slightest mistake could bring disaster. This will be one weaning after another, stained with rosaries and skeletons. The slightest mistake could bring disaster. A candle, a straight pin, a slave owner's sins, stained with rosaries and skeletons. curved in prayer or remembrance of hurt. Candle, straight thin, a slave owner sins. Please come closer, take this from my hand. Curved in prayer or remembrance of hurt. Any launch changes everything. Please come closer, take this from my hand. I came here to live. Any launch changes everything. Pearl, pollen, salt. I came here to live. Dawn again, and this is what we wake to. Pearl, pollen, salt. Enough gentleness to go on. Again, dawn, and this is what we wake to. A high yellow sadness. Enough gentleness to go on. Start with loss. Lose everything. Then lose it all again.
Won the Red Hen Nonfiction Award 2021. Of her last book, The Body Wars, Naomi Shihab Nye said in the New York Times, Jan Beatty's new poems in The Body Wars shimmer with luminous connection, travel a big life, a grand map of encounters. Beatty worked as a waitress, abortion counselor, and in maximum security prisons. For 15 years, she directed the creative writing program at Carlow University, where she ran the Madwomen and the Attic workshops. Her new chapbook, Skydog, was just released from Lefty Blondie Press. Please welcome Gill.
Hi everybody. Whoa. Is the sound okay there? Okay. Thanks to the Grolier. Of course, it's a legendary place here. I'm very aware of that. Very happy to be here. And I'm still thinking of Angela's poems. So beautiful. Really beautiful reading, thank you. And thanks to January for that introduction. And I'm very happy to be with Lesley, who got me here and gets me places. So here we go. Okay, so I was born in this place called Rosalia Asylum and Maternity Hospital in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. It was what they used to call homes for unwed mothers. It's kind of a dated way to talk about it, but women would go there to have their babies, leave the babies there, and it functioned as an orphanage. So I was there the first year of my life, as far as I know. This poem has Boston in it, which is one reason I'm reading it. I don't have a lot of Boston, but here is a little bit. Found out my birth father was a Canadian hockey player who won 3 Stanley Cups. Yeah, with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it was a while ago. And he did play with the Boston Bruins a little bit, Pittsburgh Hornets, New York Rangers. This is called Ghost Daddies. When I was a girl, I was a boy with black boots and holster and a basketball hoop in the backyard. My reach was endless. I was birthed in a meteor shower, and all the stars knew my name. Ever since I've been on street corners with gym-cracked men you wouldn't want to know, making myself a luminary. I had this piece of paper. It took years to get it, the story before the story changed, before the government got their hands on it. I've been told. My first father was a millionaire. His name on my birth certificate, voice on the phone, his lame-ass answer. I didn't come inside her. I was the small voice asking, he was the hammer coming down, shattering me into shooting stars. I covered my bedroom ceiling with planets, prayed for a meteor hit to bury the house. My second father was a hockey player who fucked my mother when she was 20. I drove to Boston to meet him, armed with her picture. He didn't remember her. I was a professional athlete, he said. There were a lot of women. His green eyes burned familiar, and I thought he was a good man. Then, 2 weeks later, he said no, he didn't think he could be my father. I decided I've come from a long line of cowards, men who can only stand up if they're fucking, flaccid after that. Sometimes the earth moves in my dreams with lies about my past. I was bent on ruination, drugs for lunch and dinner with some dope in between. My face, the face of no father, unrecognizable, so why not? I was the immaculate cum shot. I was the wildly surviving thing, racing after ghost daddies in dreams. Dear father, wherever you are. I hope the sex was ravenous with cross-checking, slashing. I hope there were shot slats of light everywhere to see my star on the other side. So that's my Boston. So this is the title poem for Red Sugar, and I owe a lot to Lesley Wheeler, who was so generous in writing about this poem. You know, if you've ever had that luxury of having Lesley Wheeler write about something you've written, she's so great and talented, and really, really grateful. Red Sugar, I didn't really know it at the time when I wrote the book, but red sugar is blood. Seems like I would know that, but I didn't know that. And I find out later. Okay. I'm going to need to do this for a second. Okay. This starts with an epigraph by Greta Ehrlich. You walk inside yourself on roads and ropes of blood vessels and tendons. You walk inside yourself and eat weather. When I was a comet, when I was young, I was a comet with an unending shimmering tail, and I flew over the brokenness below that was my life. I didn't know until I was 12 that we carry other bodies inside us, not babies, but bodies of blood that speak to us in plutonic languages of pith and serum. When I was 6, there was a man in the woods, naked. I didn't know him, but I knew he was a wrong kind of man, so I ran. With my inside body, I see his skinny white bones and curled mouth. He looks like sickness, and it's my red sugar body. that shows me the brutal road to love, the one good man, the one song I can keep as mine. I heard it once when I was waitressing. Something made me turn my head, made me swivel to look at a woman across the room. Wasn't even my station, but the red sugar said, go. When I saw her up close, I knew she was blood. I can't explain this. I only met my mother once. I said, do you know a woman named Dorothy? Her face was pale. She said no in that hard way. Maybe her red sugar told her to run, but before she left, she grabbed my arm, said, I did have a sister named Dorothy, but she died. 2 inches away from her dyed blonde hair, I said, okay. But both our inside bodies knew she was lying. Some people call it eating weather, the way you swallow what you know, but keep it. Later it rises like a storm from another world, reptilian and hungry. It's the thickness that drives us and stains us, the not asking, just coming. The cunt alive and jewel-like, the uncut garnet in the lava flow. It's barbarism, bloodletting, the most liquid part of us spilling, spreading, the granular red sea of sap and gore, sinking, moving forward at the same time, slippery, red containing blue. It's the sweet, deep inside of the body. Okay, so now I'm going to read some heavy poems. Yeah, I don't have a lot of light, but let's see. I will read this poem. I have a lot of poems about my father, my adopted father, who I was really close to, and I lucked out having him. I'm not sure what would have happened without him. He died many, many years ago, and I'm still writing about him, and I feel that he's still here. I mean, I really feel like he's here. And so I think some of you know what that is. And so this is his ring that I always wear. And this is about that. My father disappears into flowers. The apple tree in the backyard with white waterfall blossoms. My father's body disappearing in his sickness down to 90 pounds, his hat floating on his head. My father falling into the clothes rack trying to buy smaller pants to fit. He's not gone. The air heavy with waterfall and him vaulting down the front steps in spring. So I'm going to read a couple poems that related to the assault on women that's happening now. It has been happening forever, but it's really happening now. And as I was introduced, I did work as an abortion counselor at Allegheny Women's Center in Pittsburgh. And we know that poetry is not autobiography, but this is about going to D.C. with a friend of mine for an abortion. Hot in the striped boy's heart. It's hot in the loading bridge, hot in the birth canal. It's hot in the striped boy's heart. We're two women driving to D.C. for an abortion. In my beater sea green Le Mans with the sex, drugs, and rock and roll sticker on the bumper. It's hot living in my car with the mattress in the back, the windshield wipers disintegrating, and so it's raining all the way to D.C. And my friend is terrified, let it go too long, with a guy she loves, but he could care. And she can't face her parents. Borrowed money from the waitresses we worked with, saline solution for a second trimester abortion. It's hot in the Silverman's t-shirt I'm still wearing from 6th grade with gold and blue stripes. Hot in the men's store, buying my first real shirt with my girlfriend Patty. I was a boy then, not yet a woman, following the sight lines from the silver hood ornament to the double yellow. Hot in the Pontiac trunk of clothes and boxes, and the cheap hotel in Silver Springs for the early morning procedure. 2 women in their 20s out of state for treatment. Hot in this traveling altar, these bodies run amok. Body of light, body of doubles, body of never telling anyone, never seeing her again. Hot in my striped boy's heart in this car, dragging home with no talk, still bleeding. Okay, just have a couple more here. This one was when I did work at the abortion clinic, and it, something I won't forget. One Saturday, a 12-year-old girl came in from abortion, and this is called abortion with gun barrel. The 12-year-old walks thin like a child, her hair alive in vibrating threads in the clinic light. Her mother, my daughter, I give my permission. And the girl cannot be real, or the sky would burn, not bleed like it does in the waiting room of grown women. The mother in the brittle inner office scribbles her name small on the collapsing form. Now move the flying hands of the counselor who becomes the first bird, stripping the sky blank with air leaving. Now she walks back to the maze of illuminated bodies to try to find a way to make herself dissolve. Not what I wanted for you, not this. In the inner body of the clinic, the divining of this choice, the small name solid, the songbird stopped, the singing continues. I am the counselor. There are cracks in the barrel of the gun, there is aiming, shots of sorrow, shots of light. I am ruinous with light. We are ruinous with making our lives in the procedure room. The 12-year-old opens the leaving door, a bird let loose, no clear note to sing. Song of sorrow and praise as she wears the skin of herself, this idea of skin that she's learning. Okay, I'm gonna end with this title poem for the body boards, and thanks everybody for listening. The body wars. I walked into the woods, bleeding. I left the town and mourned. Midnight in Alaska, still light, and I was alone, walking into the Sitka woods. It had been 1 year since I'd bled, and longer since I'd fucked anyone. I was propelled forward into the thickness, into the needles and dirt of Sitka spruce, and stupidly not even afraid of bear. My father, the person I clung to, needed to stay alive, had died 6 months before. He was the only one who made sense in my body, and his leaving was the impossible thing. I didn't yet know my own wars and how to name them. So during my father's sickness, when I stopped bleeding, the gynecologist said, well, it's stress. And did I know that in World War II, the women paratroopers stopped having periods? I was stunned by his directness, intensity, earnestness. You are in a war, he said. I didn't know what to do with that. And so I got on a boat to Alaska, the Alaska Marine Highway, slept on the deck until I froze. Then the shipment gave me a hanging bunk and slipped me food from the cafeteria. They said, you can sleep here, but watch out for the bow thrusters. I had no idea what they meant until the sound burst open and my berth swayed, and it was a time to get off. It was a time of great changes, And days later, I'm wandering the woods at midnight, feeling lost and found in this northern place. And it was there I felt the blood start to move, felt a rising and falling and the stream down my leg, and I cried in the forest alone for my beautiful father, gone too soon, for myself in all my ignorance, not even knowing my own wars, the ones already fought and the many to still come. Thank you.
Lesley. I'm so thrilled that you all get to hear Lesley's work because she really is a technician. She knows form and meter. She knows how to carry a line. Her work is dynamic and energetic, and she really does speak from a place that, that's experienced with youth. And so I find her work just revelatory. Lesley Wheeler is the author of Poetry's Possible Worlds, 5 poetry collections, most recently The State She's In, and the novel Unbecoming. I think she published those all within like 2.5 years, so she was busy. Recent poems and essays appear in American Poetry Review, Echo Tone, Poets and Writers, Poetry and Elsewhere. Poetry editor of Shenandoah. She lives in Virginia, that our home state. Find her work on Twitter and Instagram. Please tonight welcome Lesley.
So, oh my God, that was such a beautiful introduction. Thank you. And I'm sitting here feeling so grateful for the readings that Jen and Angela gave, and kind of mad at myself for agreeing to read last. I want to say thank you so much to Carol, wherever she went, that for calling this a sacred space, which is something I very much feel. I don't know if you've been aware of Audrey and Rich smiling over my shoulders, but I've loved that, and I want to thank Heather Brown for connecting me with James, for helping all of this beautifulness happen, and thank you for being here, and thank you to everyone who's watching on Zoom as well. I'm just really grateful. All right, I didn't consciously plan to match my new book, Poetry's Possible World, with my outfit, but I see I'm kind of nervous. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a little bit from the first chapter to kind of frame the book for you, a little bit from the chapter that talks about Jen's poem Red Sugar, and then a couple of poems of my own. So to start off, this is a book that really I started writing in 2012, so it's one of those 10-year books. Even though some books all sometimes come out right around the same time, they tend not to be written that way. It's a memoir of reading poems during a time of crisis, and I think you're going to hear some through lines among all 3 of the readings, in that we're coming from vastly different understandings of family that I wouldn't want to conflate, and yet we're writing about some common things here. Can you hear me okay?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's that?
That's good.
Okay, good. All right. Books stipulate possible worlds constructed by the creative activities of human minds and hands. Authors borrow and invent pocket universes. Others access and reinvent them through reading. Books may be an antique technology that interface with one, and through information processing and a series of imaginative leaps, you can construct a virtual reality. Experiencing what's called literary transportation your attention becomes so fixed that you may be unaware of passing time or the actual world around you. I bet some of you felt that while listening to these poems today, too. In mapping this phenomenon, both cognitive psychologists and narrative theorists favor prose narratives, usually long ones. Researchers tend to ignore lyric poetry, short verse representing mental and emotional processes, or argue that its terseness and formal qualities short-circuit engagement. This book began when I realized how intensely I disagreed with that widespread assumption. Poetry's sound patterns, sensory vividness, even its brevity and ambiguity help deepen attention. Immersive poetry reading, providing a sense of connection to distant thinkers, represents one antidote to isolation. It offers escape but makes space for change. Investigating it critically highlights the stakes of a field under siege. So I'm very aware of somebody who, as an undergraduate, fell in love with Audrey Enrich's essays and went off to my PhD program in English thinking, I'm going to write like that. And I had no idea that nobody in my graduate school would want me to write like that. The scholarly article and the poet critic, they're very different. All right. My own reading experiences come into play, as they always do, and they were shaped by crisis. In 2011, I left Virginia with my spouse and children to pursue a 5-month Fulbright in New Zealand. I was 43 when we crossed the equator. My parents' marriage imploded days later. My 85-year-old father slipped up, and my mother discovered his affair with a woman my age. They divorced before I returned home, and in short succession, my father remarried, fell ill, and died. I drafted these essays in the aftermath, pondering the meanings of my father's life and wondering what I should do with the rest of my own. He was an alcoholic who stopped drinking during my teen years without deep metamorphosis, continuing to lie, cheat, and steal vigorously. My moral high ground is relative. Living better than my father is not an impressive feat. But virtual voyaging in textual universes altered me, helping me change when change represented the only way forward. I recognized only much later that transforming my approach to critical writing, long after an apprenticeship to an alcoholic dissertation director, was another way of rebelling against fathers and perhaps putting them to rest. Another thing I feel incredibly lucky about is in writing this book, I decided it's a book about reading. I want to write a readable book that has some of the suspense of narrative, but is also not centering myself over the poems. And so each poem is keyed to a contemporary 21st century poem, reprinted in full. And I was so fortunate to find these 12 poets who would let me do that. And the first chapter is in fact anchored on Jan's Red Sugar. So I'm going to read you a little bit of that. Let's see. Oh, one of the things I think about Red Sugar when I come at it with my scholar professor brain is that it dramatizes the process of becoming immersed in something. So that's one of the things I talk about in this chapter. When Beatty describes herself as a comet hovering over her own life before she plunges in, her perspective, first distant then intimate, is a proxy for the readers. Sensory detail is an important mechanism for absorption. The visual image of the comet's unending shivering tail helps me see it, makes it more real, as well as involving me emotionally. A comet can be an omen of great things, plus the positive diction conveys a sense of excitement, of possibility. Then Beatty creates suspense, an element that is particularly crucial in capturing a reader. Some tension arises from ambiguity in the images. She's 12, carrying other bodies. Wait, is she learning about pregnancy? Is she pregnant? No, but her blood is speaking to her demonically. The plot generating detail of the man in the woods is for me a crucial hook. Now I'm committed. I need to learn what becomes of this world. The image red sugar infiltrates you, presenting a vivid way, both fresh and familiar, of being inside yourself, but also yourself. The first time you ride the poem, there are little narrative thrills, the sick man in the woods, the confrontation with an estranged relative, and little linguistic thrills. The red sugar said, go. I dog-eared page 16 when I first read the book, Red Sugar, of which this is the title poem, because it amazed me. I knew I would want to re-experience it and maybe even write about it like as soon as I saw it. Behind that response lurked another. This poem validates my own trust of instinct. Beatty's poem presents a landscape in which gut feelings keep you whole and enrich your interactions with other people. It also depicts a red sugar body as another universe we carry inside us, like it or not. Eating weather, burying the uncomfortable knowledge our instincts whisper, results in monstrous disturbance that, quote, rises like a storm from the other world. This inscape is a weird, plutonic, violent space. Remembering its presence alienates me from myself and makes me feel more alive. My red sugar body likes me to visit the pocket universe of red sugar. I have powerful gut feelings about strangers too, a sense honed during the childhood that required vigilance. Someone who reminds me of my father, I gradually learned, is likely dishonest and narcissistic. Knowing the wrong kind of man when we meet him in the woods or the office is a survival skill. I have to say too that I have another chapter about January's amazing poem, Hoodie, and I don't have time to read every little favorite bit of the book, but I have to say that this is Hoodie is a poem that I discovered when I had never met Jen, but I had been following that blog you kept about motherhood and started reading your work in the magazines and came across Hoodie in Greensboro Review, and it blew me away, and I'm not surprised to have seen since that that it was picked up in all these famous places, like republished in the New York Times. And it's a poem that kind of sneaks up on you, then it's devastating, then it's full of love. And if you haven't had the pleasure of reading it, you should go look for it. All right, so I think the writerly correlative to this experience of literary transportation is, it's often called flow or being in the zone. It's that same experience of you lose time in that kind of delight of concentrated attention on something. Well, maybe it's not always delight, because sometimes you're working through some very hard things, but it's still, there's something about that experience that I find organizes me, that reading and writing both can make me feel better when everything's pretty bad. So this is a poem that I actually drafted, and you probably don't know this, but it was like days after I met you for the first time, because my mother suddenly got lymphoma. My sister lived way closer to my mother, so was mostly taking care of her, and this was still in the diagnosis phase where she was very sick, but nobody understood what was happening. And so I went up and did a few days with her in the hospital and helped her transfer to a bigger hospital, which was when they'd finally be able to start to help her. But things looked very bad there for a few days. But my arrangement with my sister is I was going to be with my mother for a few days and then drive down to the AWP board meeting in DC, because I had just joined the board where January was. And I had this, so I was completely shell-shocked, and everybody kept telling me, I would mention that this was happening, and they would say, write it down, when you have it home. And so I went home and I did, and I was writing almost nothing at the time. This poem happened. Fire ecology. Before chemicals burn her scalp bald as a cindery match head, she rattles with fever. Gray blonde tree clinging to rock, she's weathered extinction events, eruption and glacier, scorched and quenched as if by centuries. Thought herself past cataclysm, but there's always another storm cloud hunching in. Cancer jams her, grips kidneys and wraps hard around wound's gap. What was freedom becomes kindling for chemo's controlled burn. She blazes in the hospital bed, in my useless arms, naked, shaking scrap of flame wanting confirmation. Here comes flicker and fall. Pine smashing down mountainside to oxidize on a valley floor where leaf litter sips ice slow. The paradox of life out of death feeds bloodroot striving through snowmelt. Well, I always wanted children, she whispers to the smoldering vista. Antibiotics drip cool into a bruised arm. The poisoned world all understory. To need, the smoke resembles hope, love. And look, she says, look at you. So as I said, I started writing this poem 10 years ago, and that poem became part of the state she's in, which was the 5th volume of poetry, and it was published before this book, because, you know, that's the way it goes. So the fire ecology is in this poem, in this book, which was published very inauspiciously in March 2020. So yeah, a lot of the same readings actually. When people didn't know how to do them yet, so that's kind of good. I'm going to read just one more poem from this book, and it's called L, which I know is a little cryptic, but I was writing towards my 50th birthday when I was writing this book, and I was thinking of it as just death. I was losing everything. My mother was sick. I had just lost my father. My kids were going off to college. My body was, it sucked in having a body. And there were a lot of things that I was feeling like it was just loss after loss. And so I was trying to rewrite it for myself. So I wrote a whole poem riffing on ideas of 50ness in various ways. So this is called L, Roman numeral for 50. I actually drafted it, which you can't see because it has a ragged right-hand margin, but they're actually all 50-character lines. It didn't occur to me that I should have drafted it in a monospace font so I could see that where instead I just counted. It was not the smartest composition process. And it's 50 lines long. And I should say too that I was born in 1967, and some of the names, the events you'll hear referenced in this poem are from 1967. Some of the names are people who died that year, famous people, and also people who were born that year. L. 1967 was on fire. Apollo 1 waiting to launch. Jim Morrison on Ed Sullivan stoking it higher. Mekong Delta, Newark riot hurling out sparks. Summer of Osakatimi, Sakatimi, Sakatimi, sun. Pulsar first glimpsed, black hole first named. Far south, Deception Island's volcano in flames. While an infancy rages, some recently extinguished soul was slotted in my pigeonhole. Oppenheimer, Coltrane, agreed. But I'm no reincarnate star, not even a meteor tail, toothless. Just a minor cloud of space dust reborn to squall anew. 4 decades and change accrue and big birthday looms. Half and half, golden jubilee, 5-0, code for pigs closing in, and also atomic number of 10. Mystery heat rises to scald. What is it I'm reaching for over this terrible wall? A relocation, destination, permission for ignition, because beauty burns low, potential guttered long ago. I don't know. So I avoid mirrors, except the page, and work. Burn the fuel of myself in words. program works to change this space and time. Recall Cobain and Philip Seymour Hoffman dissolved to smoke. Does it even matter how in that year of our newborn howl, Lou Reed crooned heroin into the cradles? Oh, it was a Warhol year, surreal bananas. From my room painted like late in the daylily, I can gaze across a blank tin roof pocked by finch claws, past snow-packed sockets of a desolate maple, toward the lavender brow of House Mountain for this poem let's personify as ambition, the blaze considered discourteous to mention, especially by women. Well, shouldn't I be striving? Talk to me, mountain. And with a higher perspective than mine, mountain cries, you are a conflagration. Adrenaline singes your capillaries. Let the anniversary of your ardor to be born cool you like a shadow. Desire leads only to more desire, even were your sororal motives pure, and they are not. Mountain has spoken. It meant cease building with borrowed stones unless to lift somebody else. Message over bottle. Oh, and hey, says Mountain, one more thing. All poems may be ash, but some shelter small, hot hopes, their seed swaddled in earth's velvet. What strikes me now like flint on tinder is how talking to mountains or to you is the same as talking to myself, just as impossible and just as hopeful, either or, both and. Maybe we're all alpine and none of us is. Disconnection, a gift of language we are supposed to have back. No presents, please. What's yours is mine already. But come in and have a drink on me. Today's everybody's birthday, and I've stopped counting. Well, just about. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Elizabeth, do you want to ride home? Ready to go?
Thank you. You know, your mask was that intentional?
Nice to see you, Carol. Good to see you around.
Thank you. So I have.
See where I put mine.
Yes, I'm gonna, I'm here until Monday. So I'll be there tomorrow. I'm gonna, oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm trying to buy a book. Bookstore. Can I buy red sugar?
Sure. Would you like me to put this in your bag for you?
Nah, I got my own.
That's all. Yeah, right. Just say hey.
Oh, yes. Same book too? Yeah. Oh, perfect.
So it's $14.88. Thank you very much.
Thank
Good thing I wasn't gonna.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Where'd you get?
I figured I'd actually like to buy it, but maybe.
Could I borrow it? No. I'll get, no,
Yeah, we
I'll
do.
trust you.
We're gonna take it.